Hello, Funfacts fam. Welcome to another solo round. Today's topic, voting! Yay! With the election just a few days away, I figured I would release this episode before the election in an attempt to encourage you to get out and vote. If you haven't voted already by mail, it is too late to mail in your ballot and still ensure it gets there on time. So you should drive to your local clerk's office and hand it to them directly. Or, if your city provides one, use the ballot drop box. If you aren't voting by mail, many states have early in-person voting. Call your local clerk's office to see what the hours are of early voting. If you want to go and vote on November 3rd, but don't know where your polling place is, visit Vote.Gov for more information. A lot of states have recently adopted same-day voter registration as well. So if you are turning 18 before November 3rd, in one of these states, you can register to vote on that day up. Again, visit Vote.Gov or your local clerk's office to find out how to register. So let's go ahead and get started with this week's episode. Episode 12, Fun Facts with the USA, Part 2, Voting. Living in the modern age, especially if you're white, it is easy to take your civic duty of voting for granted, as a thing that everyone does and goes to stand in line for an hour at your local clerk's with a bunch of old people early in the morning on the first Tuesday of November every year. You may even be tempted to say things like, the Constitution protects voting for all people, and you may not think twice about there being any form of voter suppression anymore. But I'm afraid that just like last episode, you couldn't be any more wrong. Once again, BIPOC folks, I discuss some hard topics in this, and if you are someone who is struggling with the world around you and not in the frame of mind to listen to this episode, that is perfectly okay. And if you do listen and you find any sort of false representation, please let me know, and I will do my best to make changes in how I research a topic and in my own biases. A brief rundown of the history of voting in the United States of America. In 1788, the Founding Fathers laid out the Constitution and created the first law about who could vote. The answer was white men who owned land. That's right, just like the politicians of today, if you were poor, female, or brown, they didn't want you to vote in their elections. Shortly after that, in 1798, the white men voted in a white male president, George Washington. As the states began to join the Union, they began to write their own constitutions that pretty much upheld the white supremacy and patriarchy by making it white male landowners. In 1870, Congress passed a law allowing all men, no matter what race, color, or creed, to vote. And it wasn't until 1920 when white women were allowed to vote. And it wouldn't be until the 60s when everyone would possess the right to vote. In 1971, the voting age was lowered to 18 because, and I quote, if you were old enough to go to war, you should be old enough to vote for or against that war. But to quote from an article by the Carnegie Corporation, challenges to voting rights in this country, like the ones we've seen recently, are hardly a 21st century invention. Entrenched groups have long tried to keep the vote out of the hands of the less powerful. Indeed, America began its great democracy experiment in the late 1700s by granting the right to vote to a narrow subset of society, white male landowners, even as barriers to voting began receding in the ensuing decades. Many southern states erected new ones, such as poll taxes and literacy tests, aimed at keeping the vote out of the hands of black folks. On top of that, there were religious tests that kept all non-Protestants from running for office. In modern times, disability and homelessness can be used against you, blocking you from voting. Let us explore a few of these voter suppression tactics, including a few things that you probably didn't even think of as voter suppression tactics, like electoral college laws, or even voter ID laws. Voter suppression tactics roundup. Not so woo-hoo. 1. Poll taxes, though they are now illegal, they were a series of taxes that were put through under the Jim Crow laws, requiring an American citizen to pay a fee before allowing to register to vote, or even cast a ballot. This, of course, did not apply to all Americans. You were exempt if you had an ancestry who voted prior to the Civil War, which means it pretty much only applies to black folk and the poor. Poll tax laws also varied state by state. In some of the states, the poll taxes was cumulative, meaning that you had to pay all of the taxes from the moment you turned 21 till the moment you were expected to die in one lump sum amount. If you couldn't, then you weren't allowed to vote. In the 30s and again in the 50s, poll taxes were actually upheld by the Supreme Court, until 1964, when the 24th Amendment to the Constitution made them illegal. Number 2, literacy tests. These were also added to the law by the Jim Crow era. These directly and nearly exclusively affected the black voter, mostly because they were applied unevenly. Often there would be exemptions for property owners and, again, folks who had ancestors who voted before the Civil War. They would even vary in difficulty, with poor whites being given easy tests and blacks being given difficult and rigorous collegiate-level tests. In Mason County, Alabama, in the late 50s, for example, at least 12 whites who had not even finished elementary school passed the literary test, while several college-educated black folks failed the literary test. In 20 states, they still had literary tests after World War II had ended. This continued to be a practice well into the 1970s, when an amendment to the Voting Rights Act banned the practice. Number 3, the purging of voter rolls is a common practice where inactive voters who have the same name as felons, dead voters who share the names with dead voters, and voters who are vocal about their distrust in the system are removed from the list of people who are registered to vote. This one is still happening today, and although there isn't explicit proof that it is being used to shut down political dissent, it is certainly a harmful practice, especially because almost no states have any laws requiring that the voter be given a chance to prove that they are them and that they do intend on voting in the next election. Number 4. In some states, early and mail-in voting are specifically made difficult practices where the burden to prove that you will be unavailable on election day falls heavily on the voter. And in some cases, major surgery isn't even enough of a reason. Widespread disinformation is our number 5. This is where any individual or group purposely lies about the days, times, and or terms of voting, like when Donald Trump was trying to make a distinction between mail-in voting and absentee voting. For your information, and apparently Trump's, there is literally no difference between the two. Number 6, voter ID laws. These target the homeless and indigenous populations. Voter ID laws are laws that state that you must have a valid state ID to vote. In order to get a state ID, you must have an address. The homeless, well, that one is obviously. They're homeless. They don't have an address. And did you know that due to technically being separate nations, most addresses on Native American reservations aren't federally recognized by the post office, making it to where while they can hold tribal identification, many indigenous folks cannot get state IDs in order to be able to vote. Number 7, if you are neurologically disabled i.e. autism, Down syndrome, even extreme cases of depression and anxiety, you can be ruled mentally unfit to vote, thereby taking away your rights. Number 8, gerrymandering. The process by which politicians draw weirdly shaped districts so that they can continue to hold on to the power. This practice is like the politicians picking the voters, rather than the other way around. Number 9, the largest form of voter suppression, is literally the Electoral College. It has only happened 3 times in history. Once in the early days of the country, and again in 2000, and most recently in 2016. What am I talking about? When the Electoral College votes don't match the will of the people. Let me explain how the Electoral College works. When you vote for a presidential candidate, you are voting for the party that candidate belongs to's Electoral College delegates. Those delegates are who actually votes for the president. Electoral College delegates are awarded by percentage of the votes to eligible parties in each state. And each state has a set number of delegates that match their combined number of senators and representatives, with the exception of Washington, D.C., who gets 3 delegates. Due to gerrymandering, these delegates can almost always be sure to align with the political party their district voted for. So, if there are 10 red districts and 4 blue districts of Congress, there will likely be 10 red and 6 blue delegates. As some states do actually delegate their senators to the lower set of delegates. Some delegate them to the higher set of delegates, so that would end up with 12 reds and 4 blue delegates. Some states have implemented laws that the delegates go to the popular vote in that state. So, if they have a number of large cities that outweigh the population of the country, the vote is likely to see all the delegates turn to the one side rather than the other. And vice versa is almost always true. But many states split their delegates by percentage. Furthermore, only federally recognized and funded parties may put forth delegations in an election year. At this time, there is only 2 recognized parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. This means that even if a third-party candidate wins 97% of the popular vote, the Electoral College delegates will still be split by percentage of whomever, Republican or Democrat, won the remaining 3%. And the Republican or the Democrat with the most Electoral College votes will become the president, despite the overwhelming will of the people saying that they want the third-party candidate. There is some good news, though. If that were to happen, or if a third party gains at least 5% of the popular vote, they become the official third party of the United States, gaining federal funding and the eligibility to put forth Electoral College delegates in the following election. Unfortunately, that is the following election, so the election after the election which they won the popular vote in. All that is to say that voter suppression is literally written into our laws and Constitution. But there is hope. This year we have already seen early voting by nearly 10 times what it was in 2016. And they are still predicting that there will be long lines at the polls on November 3rd itself. There are some things that I failed to talk about a little more in length in the last episode, and somewhat on purpose. The last episode was designed to give you the sense of dread and the sense that our history has built up to where there is a literal white supremacist sitting in the White House. It was built that way predominantly because it's true. Also, there are several more white supremacists in Congress, several thousand at state and local levels, but that's not what this episode is about. This episode is actually to do the opposite, to give you hope. Hope that things can change. So, I'm going to talk about a couple of the things that I neglected to talk about or didn't talk about in detail. The main one is, in 1870, the year black men were given the right to vote, there were dozens of liberal black men elected to local and federal positions. And I'm actually going to name two of them. The first black senator who was elected from the state of Mississippi was elected in 1870. Hiram Rhodes Revels was his name. Not only that, but after serving in the Senate, he became the first president of Alcorn State University. He also fought in the Civil War, organizing 2 black regiments to fight for freedom in the North. That same year, Joseph Rainey was elected as the first black man in the House of Representatives. He was born into slavery, but his father wanted a better life for his family. So his father, Edward, got permission to work independently as well as for his former owners, eventually learning to be a barber. Edward saved up enough money to buy his family out of freedom. Joseph was unfortunately conscripted, however, by the Confederates as a cook and blockade runner during the Civil War. He eventually was able to escape with his family to Bermuda. From there, after the Civil War, he moved back to South Carolina, where he was elected after he ran for the House of Representatives. There were only 2 senators of color before 1900, but there were nearly 30 representatives of color. Despite the Jim Crow laws and the horrible racism of the Civil War that never ended, the one that we are still in to this day, black people and people of color were holding offices. And the peak thus far of the civil offices was actually President Obama, the first black president recently. Now we just need a woman president and a black woman president. And hopefully those will continue to be norms for the United States. Hopefully we can get to the point where race and color aren't criminalized and penalized as things that are bad. They're not. That's racism, just terrible, horrible racism. And unfortunately, racism is on the rise again. It seems that white supremacists have infiltrated every level of the government, from the cops to the president. But there is still hope. Again, voters are already turning out in record numbers. All you have to do is vote. Vote! Fun fact, it is illegal to fire an employee for taking time off to vote in 30 states. And in many of those 30 states, you can actually do it on the clock at your job and get paid, so long as you do it within X amount of time. Have hope that things will get better. I don't usually quote from the Bible because it was used to torture me as a non-binary bisexual teen. But Matthew 7 verse 7 says, "Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find." This is not an either-or calling. It is a demand for action. First, you must have hope. If that is in the form of prayer for you, great. If it's just hoping that things will generally get better, that's fine too. The universe will always hear your prayers and always feel your hope. But hope just opens the door for things to be possible. The next part is seek and you shall find. It is a call to action. You must go out and do. You must go out and be the change that you hope to see. You hope hunger will end? Great. Now that you've hoped, go volunteer at a soup kitchen. You hope Trump will not be elected? Great. Now go vote for Biden. This week's challenge is a build on last week's. 1, from last week, do good. 2, accept someone for who they are. 3, hope for change, and then do everything you can to make that change happen. And then my challenge for you for number 4 is vote. Go out and vote. This is possibly the most important election in anyone's lifetime. So go out and vote. Also, I'm going to make this explicitly clear here. Due to the Electoral College, if you do not want the white supremacist president that we currently have to win, you must vote for Biden and Harris. I know it's going to be tempting to vote for third party. And you can. Vote for all the third parties in all of the local elections, because those are elections they can actually win. However, third parties cannot win the presidential election at this time. Again, due to the Electoral College, they cannot win. It's sad, but it's true. It's just a fact of our life. There is currently a push to remove the Electoral College. And I think that this is a phenomenal idea. The reason that the Electoral College hasn't been removed is because there's a lot of folks who believe that then the entire voting system would just go to California. This is not true. It would be arranged to where the places with the most populations do actually end up overtaking the vote, but that's how it should be. The population is voting for something, so the majority of the population should be able to win that vote. Remember, land doesn't vote. People do. There's zero reason that a vote in Wyoming, one of the least populous states, should have more weight than a vote in California, one of the most populous states. So again, go vote. And if you don't know how to vote, or you don't know what to do, or you're looking for information on your polling place, go to Vote.Gov. It is a government website that not only can give you information by state where you need to go vote, it can also help you find out how to best register in your state. Only a few states, just a few handful of states, have laws stating that you must register by paper or in person. A lot of states allow you to actually be able to register online, and a lot of them allow you to register online same day. Go out and vote. There's nothing more important than you can do but vote. And not only that, look into your local elections. There is an election every November. Not just every November every 4 years, every single November. And oftentimes there are spring elections as well, especially for local elections. A lot of states' internal Congress term limits are smaller, and there are even some that can be every 2.5 years. So those elections are very important. Although, yes, the federal government is the main government in charge, a lot of what the federal government does is not going to affect your day-to-day life. But the votes that will affect your day-to-day life are the local governments. So it's not only important to vote every 3 years, it's important to go vote in every election. Look up your polling place and your city and your town in your state on Vote.Gov, and it will even tell you about your local elections. Also, if you're voting absentee, Google your senators and the people that you don't know their names who are running in these local elections. This is the most important vote of your lifetime. Just go vote. This show is recorded, produced, directed, and edited by Connor J. Cassidy, with music by Sounds Like Sanders. Our podcast is hosted on podserve.fm, and our music was found via soundstripe.com. Please follow us on all social media at Funfacts with, and if you like the show, consider supporting us on Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, have a nice day.